So Jesse Berger, welcome to the Why Bitcoin Show.
Thanks so much for having me. Great to be here.
Jesse, you're one of the other Bitcoin mentors that I've met along my journey with the Bitcoin Mentor team, and it just blows my mind how many smart, articulate folks are out there that are passionate about Bitcoin, and there's just so much untapped talent. And you've come across my radar as one of those chaps, and I was really keen to chat to you today about all things Bitcoin. You've obviously done some work as an author, you've come from a finance background, but just out the gates, maybe you can just give the folks who aren't quite as familiar with your work, just give them a little bit of an introduction as to who you are and touch on your Bitcoin story if you won't mind.
Yeah, absolutely. I come from a pretty vanilla background when it comes to my education and career, I would say. I studied economics and philosophy, which is, sort of an odd pairing, but it worked for me. Worked in retail banking the first few years of my career, went on to become an investment advisor for another few years after that. And it was really at the tail end of my banking career and the beginning of my investing career, my like full-time investing career, that I discovered sound money in Austrian economics, which was one of the precursors to me getting really into Bitcoin. I wound up going back to school, getting my MBA, became a management consultant after that. I did some consulting for some big banks here in Canada, and then I wound up leading the market research program, which is like, you get those customer experience surveys, radar, your service out of 10
Yeah.
with us. So I led for one of Canada's big insurance companies, their entire market outreach program for a couple of years. Um, and it was basically at the tail end of me doing that I actually got into Bitcoin. I had heard about it earlier in my finance career, never actually bought any, and saw it sort of go from a buck to $50 at one point in 2011 or whatever it may have been, and thought, oh, I missed the boat. I saw some merit in the fact that it's scarce and you can't print more of it, and there's this clear and certain monetary policy, and you can't print coins for free. Like I saw the monetary value in terms of assessing it like qualitatively. I saw that earlier on, but I wasn't, I didn't know how to buy it, and I wasn't comfortable with it, and I wouldn't have known how to use it, a wallet, because there was no infrastructure at the time anyway. So I didn't end up buying early on, but then sort of came back into it. It was about 2017. Things started to take off. And of course, you buy a little bit, it becomes worth a whole bunch. And you go, okay, I got to pay attention to this. And so that was sort of 2017, 2018. And basically, my knowledge of money and economics started combining with the interest I was taking in, okay, well, how does this work? Like, let me figure out a bit the technology and the engineering and let me put the puzzle pieces together.
Yeah.
And once I sort of put both those, like got the technology side somewhat figured out and combined it with my monetary and economic understanding, I thought, oh, I get it now. I get why people are so excited about this, and that, like, this is the thing that matters, and all this other crypto stuff is all noise. And there was a few meandering years in between then and now,
Yeah.
where I published a book because I just wanted to explain Bitcoin to people. It's like, once that light bulb goes off and you sort of see Bitcoin for what it is, I I wanted, I wanted to share that. I thought, oh my God, people need to know about this. So my book was my effort to really pass that message on, and I tried to do it in a way, understanding that most people don't really have a good, whether it's economics background, technology background, software, game theory, politics, putting all the different puzzle pieces together. You sort of have to be a jack of all trades, master of none, or at
Yeah.
least you can be a master of a few, but you definitely need to be a jack of all trades. And so I tried to create, something that was concise and friendly and relatable. And so that, hopefully people could understand it. And so far it seems to have gone pretty good.
Very good.
And here we are now.
Well, I mean, a lot of people say when they write books, part of it is so that they can kind of clarify their own thinking. Would you sort of agree with that? I mean, I mean, you obviously had put the pieces together, but did it really kind of fall into place once you did the work?
Yeah, I would say I had a ambiguous understanding in my head, but then actually putting pen to paper, you have to really crystallize every single thought along the way and all the little puzzle pieces to make sure they fit well together, that when you stand back, you have a cohesive whole. And so the process of writing and breaking it down into the different chapters and different topics, I was able to drill down into topics that maybe I thought I knew. And there was a couple where it's like, I thought I knew, but then one or two things were maybe a little different than I thought. And it still, everything still made sense and worked. But I was really able to formalize and crystallize my thoughts on everything. And it helped me. It was a research project, right? I was learning as I was writing because, like I said, I had this vague picture, and then it became a much more clear picture as I went into it.
Yeah.
So I totally agree with that sentiment. Yeah.
Yeah. I had a funny experience when I was first getting into Bitcoin where I put together like an 80-page thesis because partially I wanted to justify going hashtag irresponsibly long. But
Yeah.
on the other hand, it was just to get my thoughts out there because I thought I've got to figure out how this thing all fits together. And it was all kind of all these disparate knowledge areas, and you want to bring it all together. And my thesis is still available on my website. Um, I've read it subsequently, and it's amazing how you learn over the process. Because I wrote that in early 2021, and there's the way that I've described things and the way that I've articulated things isn't quite like I do it today. But I kind of leave it up there because it just sort of reminds me of, how early I was in my journey. Something I'd love to touch on there, Jesse, is just on your background. I mean, the economics and philosophy piece. You know, I suppose, and I guess I know the answer to this question in many ways, but did the economics education impede your ability to see Bitcoin initially? Did it take some sort of personal characteristics on your part to actually really dig deeper and then go the Austrian economics route?
Um, I guess there's a couple parts to answer that. Number one, like throughout high school and my undergraduate degree, I was, let's say, just skeptical and thinking, what am I doing here? I feel like I'm, trapped in a sense. I thought there was more to education than schooling, let's say. So I sort of, again, had this vague notion of it. I couldn't quite explain it. I could do a much better job today than I could have, when I was 18. So I wasn't the best student at that age. Um, I did try, I learned a little bit about economics, but I would say it never stuck other than microeconomics. Microeconomics made so much sense to me. Like the first three or four lessons you learn literally in high school economics, like opportunity cost, supply and demand, just some of the really
Yes.
basic stuff, you can apply that on bigger and bigger scales. Like that makes sense as you zoom out, opportunity cost especially. But then you get into all this other macro stuff, and it just seems like gobbledygook and nonsense. And frankly, I found it to be more theoretical than practical in the real world. Like any of the theories that I may have actually internalized when I was in school, and there weren't probably too many, but of the ones I did, you get into the real world and you're like, well, I can't really make sense of this. I can't really understand it. It doesn't. I don't understand how any of this stuff works. And I started working. My first job in retail banking was just as the financial crisis struck, the global financial crisis. So I sort of had my, awakening to Austrian economics around then because I saw, oh, the central bank is printing $600 billion and just giving it to the banks. And I'm thinking like, did they just have $600 billion lying around? Like I wish if we had known that we could have spent it on something else before. Wouldn't that have been, and then, oh, they just made it. Well, they just made it. Like, why am I working so hard for money? They're just printing this thing. So I'm doing the math. I'm like 2 + 2, and they're telling me it equals 5. Like, no, 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 no. Something doesn't add up here. And that's eventually, someone, a good friend of mine, basically introduced me to some thinkers. It started with Peter Schiff, believe it or not, but there were some other thinkers at that time who were just right directionally and
Yes.
both generally and more specifically about all the dominoes that were knocked over during the financial crisis. And so I started following those guys and reading their work, and that led me, yeah, to Schiff, but also the Ron Pauls of the world, von Mises, Hayek. I read a bunch of their books. Again, this is 15 years ago for me now or longer. Um, and all of a sudden I thought, wow, like this makes so much sense. I can see the picture more clearly now. And so it was those lessons that I basically taught myself that allowed me eventually to see Bitcoin more clearly when I
Yeah,
came into it for the second or third time.
totally. And that lack of alignment between that sort of Keynesian economics education and reality is also something that I can relate to because quite honestly, like, I hear it every single day. Like, I just watched a clip before we went live today of the housing minister here in Australia talking about what they believe is the solution. And I'm like, the problem is
Oh,
that you're
it's infuriating
interfering.
to listen to politicians.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's that you're trying to put your finger on things and trying to adjust
Yeah.
things. You're just not letting the
Yeah.
free market do its thing because you've created all sorts of incentives for people to buy multiple investment properties so that rich, wealthy people are now competing with people who just want to live in the asset itself. So there's all sorts of things that I look at from that, not necessarily coming from a highly educated Austrian economics perspective, but it's just a case of, the overall economic system is a very complex system, and the hubris that, excuse me,
Yeah.
policymakers have to think that they are able to somehow optimize the outcome by sort of tinkering the dial one way or the other is really where it just there's that lack of alignment to me.
Yeah, and their hubris discounts humanity, basically, like human ingenuity writ large, right? It
Totally.
says, well, I have no faith in my fellow humans to get their shit together and figure things out, so I need to do it for them, and only I can do it. And in Canada, so for the next, I think it's 2 weeks or whatever it's going to be, some very short period of time, they're removing GST, which is like one of our many taxes. um, on certain essential items. It's like some groceries, even though groceries are mostly not taxed, and then like some essential goods. I don't even know what they are. Again, okay, so some people want things that are essential, but maybe that's non-essential to someone else. I don't know. Anyway, and it's like they're calling it a tax holiday because we're going to ease the burden on Canadians. It's like, well, why don't we just do that all year round then? If you're so concerned about easing the burden on Canadians, not only do what you're proposing, do it all year round, but all sorts of other burdens that you're putting on us. Let's take those away too. And of course, it's all politics, right? The it's just
Yes.
about, well, we're doing the optics of we're helping you for this very short period of time, but that's literally it's like just happening right now here that we're having a tax holiday for the holiday season for a few weeks or a month or whatever it is. And there, Trudeau and Freeland are sort of top politicians here, are all touting it and give us
Yes.
more points in the polls because we're saving you money. It's like, save me money all day, every day, forever. Stop, don't
Stop with
ask
these
for a
once
favor
off.
from me
Yes.
because you're like, well, we're gonna give you a break for a week, so like thank us, bend your knee and kiss the ring because we gave you this table scrap.
Totally. No, it's the same here, and it's so it's so demeaning to the population when when the politicians think they can buy people's votes with these very cheap gestures that actually
Yeah,
just further distort the market as a whole. The one trick that we had here, there were two tricks we had prior to the state election, which was held a few months ago here in my home state of Queensland. The one was 50 cent. Transport fares anywhere across the state. Now, often the train is going, at like 11 o'clock at night and there's not a soul in sight. Obviously, the operating expenses are the same. Obviously, someone's going to be paying, right? And that
yep.
someone is me and you in the form of rates and taxes. So stop pretending like this is like a panacea of sorts. The other was, the electricity costs are really running out of control. What we'll do is we'll just give you all a credit of $1,000. So I didn't even know about this because I don't watch government propaganda media. I don't listen to the radio, or whatever. So I went into my bill and it said credit of 1,000. I was like, what? And then I heard it was some cost of living assistance, and I was like, oh, thanks very much. But
Yeah,
again, could
thanks
you
for
not
giving me
just
back some of my money. Yeah.
yes, could you not just find a way to make me just pay less tax overall and deliver better service? Jesse, just something with your background, and then I guess we can move on from there, is, being kind of classically trained as within the traditional finance framework, if you will. Um, One of the things that's very obvious to anyone who spent time within, I guess, Bitcoin Twitter is traditional finance fellas don't tend to see Bitcoin. And I'm just wondering if you've got any insights as to why that might be the case. And I guess flowing on from that, if you were to be talking to someone in traditional finance and you want to try and help, I don't want to say sell Bitcoin because you don't have to, but if you wanted to help them understand, how would you actually, I guess, propose Bitcoin to them? As you may know, I've partnered with the legends at Bitcoin Mentor, headed by BTC Sessions, to look after the Australian market. And we're laser focused on helping you get your coins off of exchange and into self custody. Wherever you are in your journey, whether you're just getting started or you're advanced and you're looking to up your game, we've got the skills, knowledge, and experience to get you on your way towards true ownership and sovereignty. Personally, I believe that if you require cooperation or permission from any third party to move your coins, then you're not really self sovereign and you don't actually truly own your own Bitcoin. In fact, in that case, I think you may as well just own the ETF. Self custody isn't as difficult as some people make it out to be, and I'm very passionate about helping people who care about sovereignty take control of their Bitcoin. If you're interested in finding out more about how we can help you, hit me up at dale@bitcoinmentor.io, or you can book a session with me. The link is in the show notes. Now, back to the show.
Yeah, the second part is much trickier, but I'll start with the first one. Um, in my experience, traditional finance guys and girls, um, they're so accustomed to, the valuation methods that they know and love, even though they already know that, oh, I value something this way, and then the stock might react or not react, based on their scientific method of valuing something. So they sort of already know it doesn't work. There's an element of risk and uncertainty with it. But they can't, or not can't, it's very difficult to shake them out of those customs, I guess. Things like, well, what's the cash flow of Bitcoin? Well, Bitcoin doesn't have cash flow. It's just a great asset. Like, it's just a great fucking asset. It's the
Hmm.
perfect fucking asset. Um, Forget cash flows. We're talking about it's just going to grow, it's going to appreciate in value. It doesn't need to spit off cash flow because it has all these properties that make it worthwhile. And over time, more people are going to see it for all these, for the different incentives and the people joining the network, et cetera, et cetera. And the monetary policy and this, that, and the other. And that's going to funnel money into this fixed asset or funnel value into this fixed asset. And so the value will grow. I don't need cash flow from it because I'm getting capital appreciation if we're measuring in dollar terms. And obviously that speaks to them to a degree, but then they like shake their head and they'll go, but it's not a business. And so it doesn't earn anything. And, there's no interest. And that I find is one of the big sticking points is just the cash flow or interest part of it, because they're so used to bonds and stocks.
Hmm.
Um, and obviously the gold analogy is very common. But then if you're going to make the analogy to gold, they'll go, well, but gold I can hold. It's it's physical. I can see it. I can taste it. I can touch it. But what do I do with Bitcoin? And it's like, well, can you hold Google Maps? Because I can give you a paper map if you want to use that to get around. But I think you're going to prefer Google Maps because you can zoom in on the roads on whatever country you're in, and you can see whatever restaurants and gas stations are available and what their ratings are, and their hours of operation. So you can plan your route. Can you do that with a paper map? Like, no, this is programmable money. Like, this is far superior. But I digress. Whatever.
Hmm.
Um, so there's obviously you're seeing it now where they're coming around more and more. It's one of those things, I guess, where as it gets more accepted. The other thing I'll add. Sorry, I'm changing tunes as I go
Yeah,
here.
no, that's all
Uh,
good.
I think, and this is something I'm really internalizing more lately. There is a degree of ego at play with traditional finance guys, where if you've been successful investing or a successful business person, and so you understand things, and I'm successful, and I'm sharp. I would know things. If this was something I would know about, I would understand it. Like, that is a mentality that is very real and it exists. And so when you present Bitcoin and you go, yeah, yeah, no, I like it, but I hear about this blockchain technology and I want to get on. I think that's where the real change is going to happen. There's a million cryptocurrencies. Forget the Bitcoin thing. or Bitcoin is too high, right? It's 50,000, it's 70,000, it's 100,000. I want the unit bias. I want, the Ripple Tard coin that's, 10 cents and that's gonna, forget the, I don't know about the fundamentals. Don't ask me any questions about that. Like this is the bankers are gonna use this. So, they get in their own way, I think is what it comes down to a lot. And the ego of like it was $1, it was $10, it was $100, it was $1,000, it was $10,000, and now it's $100,000. So I missed the boat 5 times over. Well, I'm not going to get on the boat now. It's like, well, but the boat's never going to stop. Like
Yes.
there's no end to this journey. It just keeps going forever. So you can, it's 100,000, but guess what? You can still get on, and you stick around a while. You're probably going to benefit from it, but you have to put aside the fact that, well, I bought it during the last cycle at 50 and then I sold it at 25 when it dipped. And so I got out and now I'm gonna try to find something else and I'm just gonna keep running on this hamster wheel. It's like, dude, get off the fucking hamster wheel. Like just
Yeah.
get off of it, put your ego aside, take a position. You don't have to dump everything you have into Bitcoin, but like get a position, stick with it a while, learn about it as you hold it, and maybe as you do that, you'll be humbled a little bit. You'll come down, you'll learn a few things, and then you go, you can catch your breath. You're not running so hard anymore. You're not, chugging on that treadmill anymore, and you're not like, I need to be the fastest and smartest and whatever. It's like, no, I'm a dum dum. I was a banker. I wasn't like the brightest guy. I just s- saw this thing and I got it, and I thought I was late when I got in, and now it looks like I was early. But you get in now, and you wait 8 years, and people will say you were early. So ego gets
Totally.
in the way, and like the um, traditional training of how to value things because Bitcoin just doesn't fit that framework. And then, yeah, in terms of orange pilling and getting people to understand, I don't think there's any one thing. Each individual, right, we're all unique. We're all programmed our different ways. We all have different experiences and understandings and educations. And so when you come to Bitcoin, maybe it's the monetary angle that's going to get you, but maybe it's the technology angle that's going to get you, or maybe it's the governance. Maybe I mean the fascinating game theory. Maybe it's the network and the network effects. Like I don't know exactly what it's going to be, and so you kind of have to just keep working at it whenever you encounter someone. That's my
Mm,
experience. Is that I can make the same pitch to 10 different people, and it'll work on two, and then I'll make a completely different pitch to the same 10 people, and it'll work on one, and then I'll make a completely different pitch to those same people, and it'll work on three people. And so you just each individual, it's something eventually will strike a chord with them, but you can't really know what it's going to be.
brilliant.
You just keep plugging away at it.
That's so well said. That's so well said. The ego piece is undoubtedly huge. It's not an IQ test as much as an ego test because
Yeah.
ultimately you've got to acknowledge the fact that it doesn't fit within any prior mental models, and you've got to dig a bit deeper. You've got to actually go and do a bit of research. I, like everyone, and this is probably a very rational view, dismiss Bitcoin initially. If you're not a skeptic from the outset, I don't think you're thinking. If you just
Yeah.
hear about Bitcoin and go, "Oh, it's the future," I think that's equally dumb as, someone who just rejects it outright. Like you've actually got to do a bit of work. And so I rejected it outright just from sheer intellectual arrogance. And it's not like I was an investor. I was just like, I learned about traditional value investing. And I was like, this doesn't fit within my models. How do you value it? I don't want gold.
Yeah. So this is just money someone made up on the internet,
This is just
right?
some
Like,
nonsense. Exactly. Like, how on earth is this going to be valuable? And a friend of mine was telling me in 2014, we need to start mining Bitcoin using solar panels in the Namibian desert. And I was like, what? This is stupid. Anyway, I have thanked her subsequently. But the second piece of what you were saying in terms of how you quote unquote pitch Bitcoin is actually very interesting because it is so true that it depends on who you're speaking to as to which aspect of Bitcoin is going to resonate most deeply. I find with ordinary people, just talking about fractional reserve banking, talking about the evolution of money from bartering and eventually to, coinage to eventually little pieces of paper representing coins, that story does resonate. But not
I would
necessarily.
agree with that.
Yeah, that's ordinary people. But I would say, like with from people in finance, I think there's so many aspects to it. I mean, if I'm talking to somebody in Africa, I think things like the fact that it's permissionless,
Yeah.
unseizable, capital with wings. I think that resonates big time. That it can't be debased. That makes a lot of sense. So,
It's
um,
very funny that you just said, sorry, I'm gonna stop you for just one quick second. That you said
yes,
capital with wings, very specifically, that those are your words. This is a picture from my book. So it's the sort of fiat man. Sorry, I'm
yes.
very loud in the microphone there. It's sort of the fiat man with the wheelbarrow of cash in a race against the wizard, and he's got the Bitcoin with wings there.
There we go. I
And
love
they're
it.
racing up, yeah, and they're racing up the mountain there.
That's awesome, man. Yeah, so it really does ultimately depend on kind of who you're talking to, and you've just got to ask questions, and that's something that I've learned over time. It's just like you ask a bunch of questions, and eventually you start learning more and more about kind of what's going to resonate most, and particularly like I suppose I also find people in developed nations like Australia and the States, it's going to be a very different conversation to folks in Africa. That's just generally how I
Yeah,
think. Yeah.
like for me in Canada, just echoing a little bit what you said about the fractional reserve banking, we're feeling the effects more and more of inflation, of money printing, of debt binge spending, right? Where more and more people are becoming more conscious and more viscerally affected by the fact that their money is losing value. And so that's opening the door for questions. And so that resonates for sure. But that's the problem. And uh, in my, for me personally, I had to understand the problem in order to then understand the solution, right? I think I've said before in other talks and things, if you pitch Bitcoin, and maybe this actually correlates with what I was saying about TradFi people, but
Mm.
you pitch Bitcoin to someone who still relies on and thinks there's merit in the dollar system, and Bitcoin doesn't necessarily make total sense. But if you understand that, the fiat system is fatally flawed, then all of a sudden, okay, well, yeah, like Bitcoin is a solution to this very concerning problem that we have. And so, okay, like now I can try to figure out how and why Bitcoin addresses these problems and how it fixes so much.
100%. It's just so funny how embedded the fiat monetary system is actually in people's minds. And it's like they can't escape that, the matrix, so to speak.
Yeah.
Yesterday
So,
I was talking
yeah,
to somebody about the fact that, I put aside some sats for my daughter when she's 21. So, I think it'll be a sizable chunk by that time. And,
yeah.
the person's response was like, I hope you've diversified into other things. Have you not heard of a, interest-bearing account? And I was like, oh, where do we begin here? Like it's pretty difficult, but I think and this is in my quote, and you said earlier, like, hey, I've said this on other podcasts. Listen, people who listen to me go, this dude repeats himself constantly, but I always refer to Parker Lewis's quote of, Bitcoin doesn't fit any mental model. It's very abstract, but
Yeah.
it's very difficult to see, but it's almost impossible to unsee once seen. And
Yes.
I think what we've done as Bitcoiners is migrate to a Bitcoin standard. I mean, I still, live and breathe fiat in the sense that I earn it, I pay my bills with fiat. But when I think about my wealth, I'm measuring in Bitcoin terms. I'm not looking for, the for other assets. I'm actually like it's a lot simpler a strategy as opposed to the fiat guy who is trying to find what are the best risk adjusted returns? How do I pick the right fund manager? Should I be looking to allocate some into this gold ETF? Okay, the long end of bonds are looking like a total waste of time. I'm going to go on the short end here. Like, it's really tricky. Whereas I think for most of us, we just keep things relatively simple on our own balance sheet at home.
Yeah, the just on your story of, you know, thinking in Bitcoin in the sense of valuing things as you look at in the real world. I was at dinner with some friends the other night, or my wife's friends the other night. And so I helped my wife's friend's husband, get a little Bitcoin a couple of years ago. And it's appreciated. It's probably up two or three times, since he first bought it. And he keeps saying to me, he's like, "Oh yeah, I sold a little bit to sort of pay off my initial, and that's fine. You gotta do what you gotta do to feel comfortable. But he still has this much, and he's like, if Bitcoin gets 1 million, like that could be like a condo, or he's like, or it'll my daughter, I'll buy a condo for her so that she can go to school or whatever. And then he says to me, he's like, but like, aren't you? And he loves race cars, this guy. He loves fast cars. He's like, but
Yeah.
aren't you tempted? Jesse, you're a Bitcoiner, you've had it for years. Aren't you tempted to just sell some and like get yourself a McLaren or get yourself, a fancy car? And I'm like, no, like not even a little bit. Like, like he's like, that really hasn't crossed your mind. I'm like not even once. Like it's like I don't need it. My car works fine. I have a house I live in. Like I like I still live mostly in the fiat world. My bills are fiat. My expenses for the most part are fiat. Um, we everything I pay for food and everything, it's mostly in fiat. Um, but if I'm thinking about, okay, well, do I want a bigger house or do I want a better car? It's like, well, I could, I guess, get a bigger house, but I'm going to have to part with, let's call it 10 Bitcoin. But then B, well, what if I just wait 5 or 6 or 7 years? Then I'll have to part with one Bitcoin instead of 10. And I'd rather do that. Like I'm not at the stage where I want to part with, X amount of Bitcoin. 10
Yeah.
is just a number I'm throwing here, but you know what I
Yes.
mean? Um, and so, you know, when he says to me, well, aren't you tempted? For me, it's like, again, just not even a little bit. Like if anything, I'm still like, I'm working for Bitcoin now. I want more of it. I'm
Yes.
still not done. It's undervalued. Why would I sell here? I have some needs. Maybe that's one thing. If there's something I really truly need or something I really, really want, maybe, but like, do I really want a freaking race car? Like, no, I don't. I don't need that stuff. I can defer my spending certainly longer than another few
Yes.
years.
You sound like Michael Saylor when he's talking to Laura Shin, and she's like, "Aren't you going to sort of take some chips off the table?" He goes, "You know what, Laura? Like, you sound like somebody in like Venezuela who's like, I'm like, now that I've enjoyed some gains relative to the bolivar, like, what am I going to do? Like, swap it out for bolivars? Like, I think."
Yeah.
It's something that I've been talking a lot about of late because obviously we are now sitting at pretty good levels, and I think most people, if you've been in the Bitcoin space for long enough, are seeing really good returns. But I mean, many would say, yeah, we're still getting started in this bull run for a lot of people, and it's a little bit early to be quote unquote taking chips off the table. When you think about your long term objectives, though, I mean, obviously, people don't necessarily just want to create wealth for the sake of having wealth. What
No.
what are some of the things that you're thinking about in the future from a wealth preservation, wealth accumulation? Do you want to do something with your money? I mean, most Bitcoiners I talk to have some sort of goals, and it, funnily enough, does not. It's not a Lambo. It's not a
Yeah,
Ferrari.
it's totally not a Lambo.
Australian friends, last year I set up a self managed super fund because I was fed up of mediocre performance and my fund clipping the ticker 1% whether it went up, down, or sideways. When I asked them, what are you actually invested in? They said it was confidential. Oh, I see. You take risks with my money, get paid no matter what, and then refuse to tell me what you're invested in. So, rather politely, I told them to GFY and I set up my own super. And that's proven to be the best financial decision I've made since buying Bitcoin. And of course, you can buy Bitcoin within your own self managed super. It's not difficult to get started. And if you're keen to learn more, email me at dale@bitcoinmentor.io or set up a discovery session. The link is in the show notes. Now, back to the show.
Yeah, so sort of continuing on, this actually continues a little bit from the last question too. My goal isn't to buy the race car. It's basically to buy the lifestyle. Like I want to buy effectively, I want to buy my time, right? I have a 1 year old at home now. This is my first child. I have had the luxury of spending 99.8% of the days basically with my child. I was away at a couple Bitcoin conferences for like a week total out of the entire past year that she was born. But other than that, like I've been working from home. So I'm here with her all the time. I have an amazing relationship with her. And I think back to my friends who previously had kids and are currently having kids. And, they leave the house, maybe you're leaving at 8:30, you're home at 5:30, you see your kid for an hour in the morning, an hour at night. And sure, you obviously you have a relationship there. You're the parent, But like I have a very strong bond with my child because I've got to spend, an extraordinary amount of time with them at this very impressionable age that would not have happened if not for me being on my own Bitcoin standard. So it's not about the car. If I have a choice between the fancy car or all this time I spent with my baby this past year, I'm choosing my baby 10 times out of 10.
Yes. Yes. Oh, that's so good. That's so good to hear, man. And that's exactly what I'm thinking for myself too. I got a 4 month
Yeah.
old, and I think the ideal situation is that I get to spend as much time as I can with her, because I think, I'm very fortunate in the sense that I know that my father made a lot of sacrifices to get us where we are today. I wouldn't probably be in Australia if it wasn't for some of the steps he took back, 35 years ago. And there was a ton of blood, sweat, and tears that went into sort of making himself a success, having come from pretty much
Yeah.
zero. But there was a cost, and like in Bitcoin, we always talk about there's no solutions, only trade-offs. The trade-off
Yeah.
was that he was basically not at home most of the time, and so as a result, I spent most of my time with my mom, got a really strong bond with mom, but with my dad, didn't get to spend that much time with him, and only got to know him really well now after I've left school, after I start working in the real world. Then him and I suddenly have a lot more in common because we can relate a little bit better. So I want to avoid
I'm
that,
I'm
and
I'm smiling
y-
because you and I talked just before we went on air. We had a few things in common just right
yes,
off the bat. This is another one of those things where my
great,
dad worked his ass off like all throughout my childhood. He was gone evenings and weekends sometimes. Worked very, very hard to put, our family in a good financial position. And, I was, as a result, sort of very fortunate growing up. And so, yeah, I joked at one point he hated this. I joked with him, or I said this to my mom or something. I go, "Oh yeah, I barely met Dad till I was 15, where he slowed down just a little bit or something," and he hated that I said that.
yeah.
But he understood. He understood my frustration. And obviously, I have a very strong relationship with my parents and everything. So yeah, we anyway. It was just very funny that you said that because two
100%,
things
man.
in
I
common
think,
here.
and I think that's the one thing that I've noticed. And I think you need to be in Bitcoin, though, a couple cycles for you to be in that financial position. Obviously, firstly, you need to have done the work to be able to make a concentrated allocation. I mean, a sort of 5% allocation is probably not going to move the needle here, at least from a Bitcoiner perspective. And then, flowing on from that, I think it takes about two cycles. Just having spoken with a bunch of people, I think you need to see two full cycles, because
Yeah,
the lowest return anyone's ever got in Bitcoin's history is 100% over 4 years. And that's
yeah,
the absolute worst case, more like, 3, 4x potentially. So, extrapolate that now over 8 years, and suddenly you've got something quite sizable. And what's really interesting, and I play with these models and I chuck it into ChatGPT all the time because I go, I've got an asset worth this much, it's compounding at this much per annum. How much can I draw down over what period? You know what I mean? And I do all these sort of, if this, then that kind of scenarios. I don't know if you think like that too, because you think, because there's going to be that point where you can start decelerating and go, actually, do you know what? Like I can keep spending at a really good clip, and I'm never going to run out of money.
yeah. I would like to think I'm young enough that I don't have to think like that just yet, and that Bitcoin is going to continue growing in value for long enough that okay, I hopefully won't have to worry too much about that kind of thinking down the road again in 10, 20 years. Um, but if you do think like that, I forget if it was Unchained or River came out with like a retirement calculator and you could
Unchained have
change
got
all
one.
the yeah, so you could change all the inputs and the assumptions and sort of play around with the numbers. So for anyone that may be listening that sort of wants to think about that, there you go. Unchained. We'd have to find the website, but I'm sure
Yeah,
if you Google Unchained's, retirement calculator,
totally.
you could probably find it.
Yeah, I could put in the show notes. Yeah, okay. Well, sort of just touching on now cycles, because obviously we are where we are, and you've come from finance, and yes, we're principal Bitcoiners. I, like you, have got a philosophy background, not necessarily economics, but it was philosophy and law, and I think we are here primarily, I think, from a principled perspective. There's something deeply important about Bitcoin that kind of resonates with us just beyond the surface, as opposed to just number go up. But number go up is just as important because without it, you've got a stable coin for life. So
Yeah.
I want to just touch on a little bit of, dare I call it, price porn. So we're sitting at about 100K, give or take now. And here we are sitting, December of 2024. Just give us your thoughts in terms of, where we are in the cycle. If you've got any thoughts, not necessarily in terms of a price prediction, but in terms of like, you know, are there things that we're missing? A lot of people are kind of going, well, it's so early and, we're looking at 200, 300K. And I've been in Bitcoin long enough, 4.5 years now, to kind of go, whenever I think something's going to happen, it doesn't. So
Yeah.
I'm preparing myself to be disappointed. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I would definitely recommend, prepare against your own, thoughts or self-interest or whatever you think is going to happen. Prepare as if that won't happen or the opposite will happen because same with me. I mean, I might have I thought last cycle, the plan B model, right? I thought, oh, the stock to flow thing, we should have hit 100,000 last cycle. It didn't. So, we can be disappointed or, you're setting yourself up for disappointment if you think in those very hard terms, I
Yeah.
guess, when it comes to price and whatever. Um, obviously higher for longer. So, the longer you stick around, the higher it'll go is the very big picture. Short term, month to month, week to week, anything can happen. I tell people we could go from here to, like you said, 300, 400, 500K, and then maybe it crashes to 150 or something. So that's still higher than we are now. But maybe we already peaked for this cycle and it's going to crash down to 20 or 30 or 40. I don't know. But I know that if I stick around, whether it's I'm buying again at 20 or 30 or 40, or I'm buying again at 150 or 170 or 200, so long as I keep sticking around and you do have to be fiscally responsible or financially responsible. You have to have a plan for your life of how you're going to spend. So you have to take all that into account. But if you can afford basically to save and keep some beyond whatever your financial needs are, chances are you're going to be rewarded. Again, you just have to stick around. Two cycles, like you said. So I'm just coming up on basically 8 years. It'll be 8 years for me in January since I bought my very first Bitcoin, I think.
Mm.
Um, so I'm like really entrenched now. I get it. It's been a while and it everything, not everything, but it feels like it all makes sense to me. And I feel like I have a game plan, a vision for who I am and what I want to be. And Bitcoin has empowered me to do those things. Um, and that's the real gain in the end of all this is it's a bit of a process of self-discovery, right? It's been said, Bitcoin is you have to go on your own hero's journey.
Mm.
Um, so we can talk about price and yeah, number go up is certainly that's what how I started is, oh, I want to buy it and have it go up in value and then I'll have more dollars. And now that I've been around a while, it's well, what if I have more dollars? That doesn't do me any good. Then I'm going to have to spend the dollars because they're going to be worthless. So I'm just going to end up back in Bitcoin because it's the best thing to have. So now I'm not even thinking about the dollars as much.
Exactly. And it's
Yeah.
so funny because what you just said is what my wife said to me shortly after Bitcoin crossed 100K. Because initially I was like, "Woohoo, we did it, baby." Like, I mean, it's a major
It's a
threshold.
milestone.
It's a
It's a
milestone.
milestone.
And I always say, like, I mean, because it's a big deal for me because I was like you expecting this to happen in the last cycle. It didn't manifest itself for a bunch of reasons, perhaps, FTX blowing up and all sorts of things. But it is what it is. And
It is what it is.
I will always remember where I was when Bitcoin crossed 100K. But what my wife said was, well, you know, what does it actually change? It means nothing. Are you going to sell?
Yeah.
No. So who
That,
cares?
th-
So
yeah, that's
and that's
exact.
it. So and then like yeah, I mean if for example you had a plan in advance and you're like, well, once it hits this price level, I'm going to sell and I'm going to do X, Y, Z, and it's going to improve the quality of my life in some way, shape, or form, then great, that's a plan. But for me, much like you, I'm kind of like, I don't actually know what else I need. I've got everything I need. I like my cars. I will never spend. I will always buy my cars cash. I will never have new cars ever. It doesn't matter. I'll always buy old Volkswagens
Yeah.
because I love them. And I've got my own house. I don't need anything else. And so all I got to do is just hold this thing. And I think what I've said before on the Bitcoin Mental podcast and elsewhere is like part of what I'm looking to do is I will be parting with some corn in the future, but I'll be buying some prime real estate in the African wilderness to be able to preserve that for, I guess generations to come. And I'm hopeful that that can happen, but it's going to take a couple cycles, as far as I can tell. And yeah, in the interim, all I got to do is just keep that cash flow, I guess, positive and stack where I can. And yeah, I mean, don't get
It,
over your skis. Don't take bloody leverage. That's what I did in the last cycle,
yeah,
which was a nightmare.
yeah, no, leverage can be a killer if you don't know what you're doing, or if you just get, you get unlucky, right? Again,
Yeah.
you think, well, Bitcoin should go to 100, and then it didn't go to 100, right? So
Yes.
I, as a former financial planner advisor, when people say, oh, should I borrow to buy Bitcoin? I'm like, slow down there. That's not necessarily the best thing to do here. Let's get a real clear picture of what your situation is and what you're going to accomplish, because that's a very dangerous game. But just coming back to what we're talking about,
Yeah.
yeah, Bitcoin, it gives me a optionality for the future. Maybe I want to buy a patch of wilderness. Maybe I want to buy, a giant McMansion. Maybe I want to buy a race car. Um, Whatever it is, I'm giving myself the optionality to do those things that maybe wouldn't have been so possible for me if I kept working my old job. I had a good job. I wouldn't say I had a great job in terms of, money. It was good. It was above average, but it wasn't amazing or anything. And I was able to live my life, and I had the place that I lived, and I could go for drinks with friends or have dinner with friends if I wanted to, and that was fine. I mean, I actually couldn't even imagine still working my old job, even if I was adjusted for inflation
Yeah.
and having a baby. Would I be able to put anything away? Like, I don't even know. I honestly don't know. So not only do I have the optionality of, okay, well, maybe I want the house, or maybe I want the place in the wilderness, maybe I want it in another country, whatever it is, like that is something I can aspire to now. But it also just gives me hope for the future that, hey, like I can have a good life. My family, my child, my maybe future children can have a good life. We can attain the things we want to attain and do the things we want to do. It all feels more achievable than it ever did 8 years ago. Even when, again, when I first, going right back to the very beginning of this conversation, when I sort of saw through the fiat sham, I became a gold bug. And gold didn't give me hope. It gave me, the feeling of, okay, well, maybe this is going to go up in value and I'll get rich, but it
Mm.
was still rich in dollar terms. Like it was, oh, maybe if we're going to transact in gold, it's going to be pretty barbaric. Like it's going to be pretty bleak. If I have to use gold or silver coins to buy a sandwich, it's very cumbersome. It's not, that's
Yeah.
it. We're in a very dark place if that's what we have to use as money. Like Bitcoin is so, we can transact all around the world now. We can do commerce and bring together people and minds and ideas from all over the place, and they can combine with each other because we have the money that can be an effective conduit for that. Whereas something like gold is so apocalyptic in a sense, right? It's like very doomerish. Whereas Bitcoin is just so much more hopeful and optimistic that we're going to do even more than we thought possible, not less. Yeah.
Yes, I tend to agree. And isn't it funny how Bitcoiners are some of the most optimistic people? I mean, there is a degree to which some Bitcoiners might be perceived as negative and whingy if you follow Bitcoin on Twitter. But I think when
I
I,
mean, Twitter's not real life.
no, I think
We
that's
know
basically,
that. We know that. Yeah.
yes, exactly. So my experience with talking to people in real life is that Bitcoiners are filled with an enormous amount of hope. They're pro-human. They're pro the environment. They're pro families, and
They're very insightful.
yes,
They come from very different backgrounds with very different specialties and interests, and you just learn so much. And that's part of the humbling process too, is that I don't know everything. I don't need to think that I know everything. I
mm,
can be open to the fact that I don't know everything, and I'll meet someone who, well, I was a banker. I wore a suit, and this guy wore a blue collar, but he's going to teach me a whole bunch, right?
yes,
I can be
yes,
open to that. Whereas, some of the guys in that world, maybe it's, it's a tougher pill to swallow, and it shouldn't be. It should be very easy to have those sort of, even transactions, a level playing field.
That's exactly right. Because in the fiat world, people like when I think about my cousins and in Australia here, and when they look at me, they go, "Wow, Dale, you've got 3 degrees, you're a lawyer, and you've got a master's in property." And I go, "Well, there's dudes who've got no qualifications in Bitcoin that are infinitely smarter than me." And when I'm in front of them, like I just listen, I just absolutely listen. So it's so funny how people attribute so
It's
much weight.
credentialism.
Yeah,
Credentialism.
credentialism. Yeah, so it's the, and for what, as Bitcoiners, we tend to reject the credential class because we kind
Yeah.
of go, well, who made you the anointed, as my friend Thomas Sowell would say, and
Yeah.
because it's very obvious that we're all capable of thinking for ourselves, and particularly now with the nature of information being free and open. I don't need to be a doctor to go and figure out what's going to be the best course of action for my ailment, whatever it might be. I can check it out. I don't have to run to an expert at every corner. And I think Bitcoin kind of turns that model on its head when it comes to the world of finance, because, a lot of people go, "Oh, I don't know. I don't know how to manage my own money." And it's like, well, if once you've understood what money is, then you can understand what Bitcoin is, and you actually realize it doesn't have to be so complicated a game.
That's
Um,
right.
you know, Something that Bitcoiners talk about a lot, and I don't actually have a great opinion on this, but I'd love to get your take, is hyper Bitcoinization. Some people imagine a world where Bitcoin is just ubiquitous and it's used as a unit of account, medium of exchange, and a store of value, of course. I don't know what your thoughts are around hyper Bitcoinization. What does it mean to you? And when do you reckon this thing could actually happen?
I would love to believe we'll see it in our lifetime. I don't know if that'll be the case or not. My interpretation of it is that I would say maybe it's changed a tiny bit. My interpretation is that in the Ron Paul vein of thinking is that let's legalize competing currencies. We can have the US dollar, we can have a bank that wants to issue its own currency, but it shouldn't have a monopoly. There shouldn't be a mandate, as it were, to use this or that currency. Let the market decide which one's best. And if we truly had an environment like that, and we also punished scammers along the way, that's part of it. The people who intentionally
Mm,
steal, well, I'm going to issue money, but really I'm trying to, to take along the way. Um, so there's
Ripple.
some nuance to my thoughts here. But bottom line, in an environment where we have honest competition, let's say gold is competing with Bitcoin and the US dollar, and those are sort of our three options. Well, I think Bitcoin would win out for a number of reasons. People would find that it's much more convenient, that it's much more valuable. They can send it, receive it, they can hide it, they can defend it. So for a myriad of reasons, it would win out, and so the value would flow away from those other things and towards Bitcoin, and eventually those would fade to irrelevancy. Will that happen again in my lifetime? I don't know. I'd like to be cautiously optimistic that, before I'm gone, I'll see something close to that, but I don't know.
Yeah. My
So
take's
yeah,
slightly different.
it's not the perfect answer, but it's
No,
the
it's
best I got.
great. I mean,
It's the
that
best
was
I
a
got.
great answer. No, that was a great answer. I really like that. And I haven't heard that competing currencies argument before. And I think that makes intuitive sense. I think and a lot of Bitcoiners would just love to see Bitcoin treated as money, so that CGT factor can just disappear, because that
Yeah,
also
like that's.
hampers us from wanting to actually part with our coin, because it's just like it's a burden.
You
And it
mean you
also
mean CGT? Sorry, you
capital
said
gains
CGT.
tax, sorry.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, because it
Yeah.
is just money, right? I
Yeah.
shouldn't have to think, okay, I bought a sandwich, it's $10. My cost base was $4.50. So do I owe, $5.50 in tax on this sandwich? Like,
Yes.
give me a break. It's just I send it, I receive it the same way I can take a $20 bill out of my wallet. I give it to my friend, he gives it back to me. I send it, I receive it. That's all Bitcoin is. It just has different qualities and characteristics. And so its value is more volatile, even though that volatility happens to be more to the upside than the downside.
Yes, exactly. I reckon, like, I mean, when I think about this Bitcoin hyper Bitcoinization, what I'm thinking is, as long as we have the nation state in its current form, there will be a reluctance on their part to, I guess, hand over the reins from a money printing perspective. And so what it might actually look like in the future is that you have a sovereign individual thesis sort of come to light where you've got these mini states that are centered around kind of low taxation and freedom optimization that will say Bitcoin is our preferred currency of choice here, and that will attract all the talents. So you might see I guess hyper Bitcoinization in these little pockets, but the likes of the States and Canada and Australia doing that in our lifetime, I would probably argue is relatively slim because it would fundamentally compromise the ability of governments to fund themselves. They'd actually have to be fiscally prudent, which they haven't been for
Yeah.
many, many years. It doesn't matter who you vote in. We've got a uni party here in Australia, so it makes no difference, Labour or
Yeah.
Liberal. And so, yeah, I think for me, this is something that's probably not going to happen in my lifetime, but oh, I'd love to see it because I would love to have a world where, we as Bitcoiners have just that optionality that you were talking about earlier, where it's like go where you're treated best and take your capital with you, and you can surround yourself with like-minded folks in an environment where the government isn't clipping the ticket every single opportunity. Because I don't know if you've run the numbers in Canada, but here, income tax isn't the worst, but when you factor in all the other taxes that you have to pay, you're running close to 45, 50%. And so you're effectively working for government for half the year.
Oh, that would 45 to 50 would be nice. Yeah, compared to
Oh dear.
that's just the income side in Canada. Then you got to
Oh,
factor in everything you buy, right? Because everything is taxed basically.
yeah.
Uh,
Yeah,
yeah, like I understand that thesis, and I think we're already seeing it play, start to play out. We're seeing little bits of it happen, whether it's El Salvador or parts of Costa Rica and other parts in Latin America with their different measures and policies that are coming out. Um, and the Czech Republic just the other day, right? No
yeah,
capital gains tax on Bitcoin if you've held it for 3 years. Like, let's just make it zero, 0 years, and then, no capital gains tax, but whatever. Sure, that's a good starting point. Um, but I also see, just in terms of the state as this behemoth, as much as it is sort of this deeply entrenched institution in our lives, the the foundations are very much crumbling, and I think we see signs of that. At least I do in Canada, and I think that's a good thing. The enforcers, as it were, and that can be the physical enforcers or the sort of regulatory enforcers, whatever, the white collar, government employees, the IRS types.
mm,
Um, I doesn't matter what discipline or which particular industry within the enforcement industry, they're slowly fading away into irrelevance. They have their teeth are being, are dulled. They're getting older. They're getting slower. They can't keep up. The amount of thugs willing to do the enforcement is falling. Again, because Bitcoiners work in government too. They exist within that body,
yeah,
and they don't want to. They understand right from wrong. Not all of them. A lot of them are just follow the process. Um, but not all of them, and some of them understand that, well, yeah, I'm still here because I have a good salary, but I know that my job is kind of useless and I'm useless, but I got to take the money. So I see slowly the foundations getting chipped away and the teeth are dulled for the enforcers. That's not to say they still can't bite, and they don't bite, because they obviously do, and they may very well lash out. But the more they lash out, that's also a sign to me that they're nearing the end of their rope.
mm,
Their backs are against the wall a little bit, because again, with the foundations crumbling, the walls slowly caving in, there's less they can turn to. There's less optionality and flexibility for them. There's less and less tools. So they lash out with whatever they can. But every time they do, they expose themselves for who they really are, these
yes,
controllers, mandators, and it wakes up even more people, and that brings more people over to the Bitcoin side of things, if we're pinning it as a binary Bitcoin versus the world kind of thing.
yes,
And so we're seeing those signs, I think, already. It may be slow, and sometimes it's fast. I mean, sometimes it's fast, sometimes it's slow. But if you're looking and you're paying attention, those signs are there. I think.
Yes, I agree. I think what you said is fantastic, man, and it's so true. There are like as I think it was Lennon who said something like there are years where like weeks happen and there's weeks when years happen or something to that effect. Where
Yeah.
I think we are at this point where we're seeing rapid change, and to your point, I think you are seeing signs of the bureaucracies slowly starting to lose some of their sting. And as that happens, they sort of like a dying antelope are kicking for their lives.
Yeah.
And they're coming up with more and more obscene legislation and all sorts of things. Whereas I think what you've seen stateside is obviously a sharp turn towards, I guess, what you'd say limited government and freedom, even though, I know they're going to be constrained, but I think, at least Canada, certainly the UK, Australia, New
We have a long
Zealand,
way to go.
we're
Yeah.
a little bit behind the curve, but I think directionally we'll get there. Yeah, JC, this has been great. I think last question I just wanted to kind of pose was, when it comes to the nature of self-custody, obviously it's not one size fits all, but this is fundamentally the work that we do together there at Bitcoin Mentor. I wanted to just get your kind of personal approach when it comes to self-custody, why it matters, and how you talk to people, I guess, when you have those sorts of engagements with clients.
Yeah, similar to what we talked about orange pilling people and what gets people to understand Bitcoin. There's no, one perfect solution to how do you store your Bitcoin because everyone's personal situation is different. Everyone's level of, being comfortable with the technology is different, whether that's a hardware wallet or software wallets, whatever it may be. Do you hold your keys? Is it custodied with someone else, some kind of collaborative method? So it's important to, be able to reflect on yourself and okay, who am I? What's my personal situation? If something happens to me, how do I want to pass on my Bitcoin? How do I want to make sure it goes to the people I love or that I want to take it after, if something were to happen to me? Sort of game planning around all the different elements involved, understanding that at the end of the day, it falls on you, right? There's no, if you're the person purchasing, owning, holding your Bitcoin, you can't email the administrator at the bank. Oh, you know what? Sorry, I forgot my password. Can you send it to me? It's not going to work like that. So it's important to just slow down, really review the different options available to you. And there are many, and they're changing too. And that's one of the trickier parts, I think, to this is that, you know, currently, we have cold cards and they're a great, great product. Um, but there's ledgers, there's treasures, there's jades, there's passports, there's all these products that are out there. Cold card's been around for a long time. I consider them top of the line, best in the business. But like, there's these other options, and maybe a jade is cheaper, so maybe that's better for someone who doesn't have a lot of resources at their disposal right now because it's still a way that okay, you can have a private key, it's more secure,
Mm.
it's not as involved or as expensive as a cold card. Not that the cold card is so expensive or anything, but that's just one consideration. Then okay, well, which software are you going to use? So there's a lot to consider. The different wallets, I used Blue Wallet was my first mobile wallet. It just so happens I don't use Blue Wallet a lot right now. I use Aqua, I use Nunchuck. I have, there's a few others that are sort of in rotation. So things are changing. It's very difficult to stay on top of it. It's obviously great that, we're working now with Bitcoin Mentor and, we're actively trying to stay on top of this. And Ben, who co-founded the company, does free educational videos. So he's putting out, okay, here's all the things I'm considering and all the things I've looked at, and here's the pros and cons. So, we're not like guarding this, these aren't guarded secrets or anything like that,
Yes,
right?
totally.
It's all out there, it's all public. We can just, help you try to assess where are you, what are your strengths and weaknesses, what are your goals, and then we can tailor it. So yeah, there's no right or wrong. Like you said, it's just trade-offs. It's just let's try to make the best trade-off we can for who we are and what we're trying to do.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, and I really love that, and it is tricky to stay on top of it, and it's just amazing when I look back at some of the folks at Orange pulled 4 years ago, and the wallets and strategies that I was recommending have vastly changed, and I you know
Yeah.
I'll some of them have come back to me now, and I'm like, Yeah, okay. We got to change that now.
Yeah, yeah,
So,
totally.
yeah, so that's what tends to happen. Um, Jesse, it's been really good getting to know you, chatting, and yeah, I think that you've got a lot of interesting insights, and it's amazing how much we have in common, despite sort of being on opposite ends of the world, very different backgrounds, but having a lot of sort of what seems to be touch points that are similar. Um, did you want to give the audience a bit of a handoff as to where they can find you, where they can buy your book, and that sort of thing?
Sure. You can follow me on Twitter at Jayberjay. That's Jayberjay. My book, I'll hold it up here for those that are watching and not listening. It's Magic Internet Money, a book about Bitcoin. And sort of the core question here is, what is money? That's a very
Lovely.
important question that if you haven't asked yourself, you should ask yourself. It's available on Amazon. So in basically any country that Amazon operates in, you can just search for Magic Internet Money and my last name or just the whole title. You'll find it. The link to the book is also available on the Bitcoin Mentor website under my profile. Anyone
Awesome.
who wants to look up more about me, go to Bitcoin Mentor and look up my profile on the team page.
Brilliant. Awesome, man. Appreciate your time. And yeah, look forward to working together more closely in the future.
You as well.